there is no heavy red stronghold in the middle of Las Vegas, but we're seeing the early voting polling locations show that when we look at the data.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the CMC Show, Candid Melanin Conversations. I'm your host, Anthony Stewart, and I got this video, or I should say, I saw this interview with Roland Martin of a gentleman by the name of Nathan. I forget his last name right now, but you'll see it in a moment. From the Truth Alliance group out here, they did an audit themselves. Put that in quotation, but they did some number crunching and found out that not only was it possible, but that it was probable for the election to be manipulated. Now, this doesn't surprise me at all, because the Trump administration, Trump himself, they were just on the horn, the 2020 election was stolen, the 2020 election was stolen. Normally, when people bark the loudest, that means they're the ones that's doing something. So, doesn't surprise me at all to find out that the probability was high that it was manipulated. Now, the way this guy explains it is fascinating to me. I think it will be fascinating to you all to take a listen to it. They have evidence, unlike the Trump administration, who did not have evidence because it wasn't true. But anyway, they went to court, 78 times or 68 or 70 times. They lost all but 2, trying to say that the election was stolen. So there's the proof on that side. But anyway, let's take a look at it, and then you guys decide for yourself. All right? Check it out.
So Nathan, just explain to us how y'all define this potential vote manipulation. What did y'all see?
Thank you so much for having me. A little bit about my background. I work in cybersecurity. I was a 25 Bravo computer tech specialist in the Army Reserves. Got my degree in network security and then commissioned at the Army National Guard. And so I worked data analysis for my normal job before kind of stepping into this role and helping found and run the Election Truth Alliance. So in terms of what we were looking at in Clark County, Nevada, they published just after the election their vote record, their cast vote record, and that goes down to the tabulation machines and the 3 types of voting. So mail-in, early vote, and election day. And so what we did is we looked at the statistical distribution of that data, and we compared those 3 types. And we saw that mail-in, it looks statistically normal. Normal distribution, a bell curve pattern. We saw that election day didn't look very anomalous at first, but then we looked at early voting. And early voting is where a majority of the votes were cast during the election for Clark County, Nevada. And when we looked at it, we actually pulled out the distribution, and we saw it shows statistical evidence of potential manipulation. And what that means is a portion of both candidates' votes look like they could have been changed. And we see that because instead of a bell curve, it comes out more of a Russian tail, as we would call it. And so what was concerning about this election and led us to looking into the actual data was, as you mentioned, 7 swing states kind of popped up after the election, and we thought that was strange, given some of the polls, given some of the other analysis. Now we're seeing the potential for the vote counting machines to have been manipulated. And so the main concern is the type of manipulation we're seeing in Clark County, Nevada. It's not unique to Clark County, Nevada. We've done analysis on other locations. And so many of these higher population centers in these states exhibit the same indications at a higher level. And that's a drop-off vote abnormality, where, for example, one party at the presidential level, they get a certain amount of votes. And then you look at the next down ballot for their party, like the senator or the governor or the superintendent, and you find that those lower positions have more votes than the president. And that's very concerning. And that ultimately also led to us diving a little deeper.
That's why a lot of people were asking, how did Trump win all of the battleground states but the only two places the Republican candidate won in the Senate was Ohio and Pennsylvania. They lost in Wisconsin, they lost in Michigan, they lost in Nevada, they lost in Arizona. And in fact, when you look at North Carolina, Democrats won governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and secretary of state.
This is a drop-off vote analysis, and this was actually made by Smart Elections,
Okay.
which is another organization that does election integrity and analysis.
Go ahead.
So they published this, and what this is showing is this is some of the swing states versus non-swing states, and it looks very suspect that Harris would underperform consistently across just the swing states, and then outside the swing states, she's almost 1 to 2%, like Trump is. The 0% is the next down ballot candidate. So in this case, I believe this is senators. So 0% is how many votes that party's senator or whatnot got. So we see in the swing states, Harris got negative 1.48% less votes than the senator across, and on average, across all 7 swing states. And then Trump got almost 6% more than that senator or that next down ballot candidate. And then outside the swing states, all the other states, we're seeing it look more normal and matching past election trends where you're somewhere between 1 to 2% over the Senate, over the senator or the governor or whatever other races there are. So that's how you read this. That's why it's concerning. Why would just the swing states exhibit a pattern? And so that's a huge red flag, because what wins you elections? It's the swing states. And so I actually did the numbers for how Harris compared to Biden from the 2024 election, the Democratic votes that turned up in 2020 for those 7 swing states. She got 99.6% of them in 24. So it doesn't make sense that she would be underperforming by a large amount in these states, but then get 99.6% of the same votes.
So with that, are you saying that you believe that the voting numbers were somehow changed either in the machines or in the transmission to the state elections board?
If we bring up slide 5 here, that's the one that's showing Clark County Election Day voting. And so
is that it right here?
Distribution. Yep, that's exactly it. This is what I was talking about a little earlier, where when we look at the vote record, this is more what you would expect to see when looking at that data. And so there's 2 different colors. Obviously, the blue is the Democrats for presidential race, which would be Harris, and the red is Trump. And so they are overlapped, but when you pull both of them out, they should look like a bell curve. And in this case, for Election Day, they look pretty much like a bell curve. You're not seeing any huge issues.
Is this right here the bell curve?
That is, this is an excellent slide. If you look at the line, and this is us pulling early voting out, the black line is what you would expect to see as a bell curve.
Okay.
So that line there that's overlaid on top of the voting data,
right,
that is what you would more expect to see. Okay. Now, if you go back to slide 4, I'll actually show you exactly what we were seeing and talk about what would potentially cause this. So comparing this to Election Day, you notice this does not look the same. It's not a more rounded bell curve, a more random and expected distribution. This is Clark County in 24 at the bottom for early voting and 2020 at the top.
Wow.
Let's look at 2020 first. So if you zoom in just a little bit, the way you read this graph is the x-axis, the bottom axis, that is how many votes the machine counted. And so each of these little dots, there's a red and a blue, and each of them are a machine that counted the votes where you voted. And so in this case, there's a ridiculous amount of votes for early voting. So let's look at the top first, and x-axis is how many votes the machine counted. And so the y-axis is the percentage of votes. The further up and the closer you get to 100%, you win more votes. And so what we saw when we pulled this data and we did this analysis, in 2020, up until about 150 to 500 votes counted by machine or cast at the machines, it looks normal. And so what's interesting is if you kind of break this down into the correlation or the trend, as more votes were cast at higher populations, the Republican Party benefited. And so what was weird about this is in 2020, What was weird about this is counterintuitive to how voting patterns normally are. Well, one, you don't generally see a trend as more votes are cast. You just see a better reflection of how people, generally feel.
Okay.
And the problem is Democrats generally benefit at high populations because they live in high populated areas. So this makes very little sense for either of those reasons.
And
this is 24.
And this is 24. Wow.
And so if you use the same concept, we see about from 250 to 300 onwards, that normal distribution just disappears, right? And you see aggressive separation. And so you're not supposed to see separation like this. And when we pull out the distribution, the slide we were looking at before, the bell curve slide. And I'll show you exactly why this is concerning and what this potentially means.
Is this it?
This is election day. This is great. So this is your other way of looking at it. Notice election day generally fits the bell curve pattern, right?
Right.
Yeah. There's a little bit of weirdness at the top.
Right.
If you go to the next distribution slide and we look at early voting, but for this type of graph.
This here?
Perfect. So this, as I said, when you look at this statistically, and so in the Election Truth Alliance, we have people with experience in statistics, data analysis. We have people with medical and engineer degrees. We have a little bit of everything. And so what we've done is we said, instead of this matching a normal distribution like you would expect to see, it shows potential manipulation. And so what we're seeing, specifically in early voting, because it's so aggressive, we're seeing that a portion of the distribution is missing. And so this suggests, since in this case, and this is candidate Trump, it suggests that his distribution shows that he's benefiting from potential manipulation. That votes, if you look at the bottom, Harris is missing a portion of hers, and since she's at a lower percentage, we see that skew. And so the way this could indicate is it has a rightward skew, and Trump has a leftward skew. And a leftward skew, or another term, is a Russian tail. And so a Russian tail is a term coined by Russian data scientists and data analysts in reference to a few different potentially manipulated Russian elections. And so they coined the term of a leftward skew. If you benefit from potentially moving votes around, you're going to have this leftward skew like we're seeing in Clark County, Nevada for early voting. So what's interesting is when people talk about election night, there's an expected pattern you see as votes come in because of time zones. And so generally, like the Northeast, as their polls close, they're more Democrat. So you would see a little bit of a blue lead. And then Florida would come in and it would go red. And then you would get the middle Rust Belt areas and it would go a little deeper red. And then the West Coast would come in last. And then you'd see that blue wave resurface, right? What's interesting is this election night, you didn't see that. And what you saw is after the first bit of votes came in, it stayed very positive for the Republicans, and it only grew. You didn't see a bounce back. You didn't see a resurgence. It almost looked algorithmic in the way the votes slowly crept up.